On a chilly morning at Windsor Castle, what began as a peaceful royal ceremony quickly spiraled into a tense, heart-stopping confrontation. A defiant biker, hungry for attention, dared to challenge the silent strength of a British Queen's Guard, unaware that discipline and honor stand taller than arrogance. Stay with us as this gripping story unfolds, revealing a powerful lesson about real strength. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss moments like this. The early morning air at Windsor Castle carried a crisp, unexpected chill, gently rustling the jackets of the waiting tourists. People had come from far and wide to witness the world-famous changing of the guard, a tradition steeped in centuries of history and pride. Among the scarlet-coated soldiers stood Alexander Shaw, a man whose quiet presence embodied the discipline of 8 years of military service. His polished brass buttons gleamed softly under the morning sun, reflecting the ancient stone walls behind him, a perfect image of ceremonial dignity. Elderly couples in the crowd exchanged knowing glances, recalling stories from their youth about British resilience and honor. Parents hoisted small children onto their shoulders, eager to pass on a sense of heritage. Yet even amidst the excited whispers and clicking cameras, Alexander remained perfectly still, his gaze fixed forward. This was not merely a role he played. It was a duty he upheld with every fiber of his being. For many onlookers, the moment offered more than just spectacle. It offered a living connection to the values of service, commitment, and quiet strength. As the sun rose higher, the stage was set for an unforgettable encounter no one yet saw coming. As the crowd settled in, expecting only the ceremonial beauty of the morning, a new, unsettling sound cut through the peaceful air, the sharp growl of a motorcycle engine. It wasn't the light purr of a tourist's rented scooter, but the harsh, aggressive roar of a heavily modified bike. All eyes turned as the machine rumbled closer, black as midnight and adorned with glinting chrome skulls and crude iron crosses. The rider dismounted with slow, deliberate movements. His large, leather-clad frame exuded menace, the kind that draws an instinctive shiver from even the most seasoned observers. His boots, steel-capped and heavy, struck the pavement with the weight of someone used to getting his way through intimidation. Patches decorated his vest, not the noble insignias of service, but dark symbols twisted by hate and arrogance. Alexander Shaw, the guard, remained utterly still, his posture unchanged despite the approaching threat. 8 years of military training taught him to recognize escalating danger. He knew that even as the bikers circled him, sneering and jeering, each step was a test. In the crowd, parents began pulling children back. An elderly couple, both veterans, tightened their hands together in anxious recognition. This was no simple disruption. It was the kind of moment where history and hate collided in the open, where a ceremony meant to honor discipline and duty was suddenly under attack. The bikers spat insults, mocking the guard's fancy uniform and accusing him of hiding behind tradition. His voice, rough with years of hardened prejudice, carried across the courtyard, drawing uneasy glances from the crowd. Yet Alexander did not waver. As tension crackled in the air, it was clear a confrontation was building, and the next few moments would test not just the soldier's training, but his very character. The tension that had been brewing in the courtyard reached its breaking point in the blink of an eye. The biker, a towering man, shoulders bulging under his leather vest, fists adorned with rings etched in hateful symbols, decided that words were no longer enough. Without warning, his massive hands shot forward, striking Alexander Shaw, the royal guard, squarely in the chest. The force of the blow echoed across the ancient stones of Windsor Castle, a heavy, brutal sound that made several onlookers gasp. For a brief moment, the proud figure in the red uniform staggered, his polished boots scraping against the pavement. His ceremonial rifle tilted, his flawless posture broke, and then, with a harsh final thud, Alexander fell. The biker's laughter rolled over the courtyard, deep and cruel, as he raised his fists in triumph. "See," he roared to the crowd, "this is your mighty protector? This is the strength you worship?" His voice was thick with contempt, his silhouette casting a long, dark shadow over the fallen soldier. The crowd stood frozen. Parents pulled their children close. Elderly tourists, some veterans themselves, looked on with clenched jaws and tight grips, their faces pale with recognition. They had seen this before, always the cruel spectacle of brute force, overwhelming quiet dignity. For 3 long seconds, it seemed as if the biker had won. His arms were raised in a gesture of twisted victory, his leather vest stretched wide, the iron cross at his neck gleaming in the sunlight. But what he had failed to understand, what so many watching were about to witness, was that Alexander Shaw was not just a ceremonial figure. He was a trained soldier, a veteran of real battlefields, a man who had stood against far more dangerous threats than one arrogant bully. As the biker turned his back on his fallen opponent, raising his fists higher to the sky, Alexander's hands pressed firmly against the stone. His eyes, once fixed in ceremonial stillness, now sharpened with the quiet focus of a warrior. Slowly, deliberately, he rose. The moment was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that signals a storm about to break. This was no longer about ceremony. This was about standing up, not just for oneself, but for the very principles the uniform represented. And Alexander was ready. As the biker reveled in his moment of triumph, his fists raised and his voice booming with hateful pride, he made a fatal mistake. He turned his back. Behind him, Alexander Shaw, the royal guard who had just been knocked, went out to the ground, placed his gloved hands firmly on the ancient stones of Windsor Castle. Years of military training and battlefield experience surged through his body. This was no ordinary man in a fancy uniform. This was a soldier who had faced real combat, who understood that strength was not about brute force or intimidation, but about control, discipline, and timing. With a smooth, practiced motion, Alexander rose. There was no hesitation, no anger, just precise, deliberate action. Before the biker could even finish his gloating, the guard's white-gloved hand shot out, gripping the man's massive shoulder with unerring accuracy. The biker's body stiffened in surprise, his laughter dying in his throat as the guard's fingers locked onto a pressure point. In one fluid motion, Alexander executed a textbook hip throw, sending the heavy man crashing to the ground with a force that echoed through the courtyard. The biker's leather vest scraped against the stones, his iron cross necklace shattering upon impact. But Alexander wasn't finished. Before the man could scramble to his feet, the guard placed his boot firmly on the biker's chest, not with anger, but with controlled authority. His stance was impeccable, his movements measured, as if he were on a battlefield, not a ceremonial post. The crowd, which had been frozen in horror just moments before, now watched in stunned silence. An elderly veteran in the crowd gave a slow, knowing nod, recognizing the mark of real training and real strength. "You want to test real strength?" Alexander's voice was calm, carrying just enough to reach the biker's ears. "Real strength isn't about domination or hatred, it's about control." The biker struggled, his muscles straining, but it was no use. Every move was countered by the guard's flawless positioning. It was a moment that revealed the truth so many had forgotten, that beneath the ceremonial uniform stood men forged in discipline, tested in fire and shaped by honor. And for everyone watching, it became clear. True strength isn't loud or boastful. It is quiet, resolute, and, when called upon, unshakable. As the royal guard Alexander Shaw maintained his steady hold over the defeated biker, the distant sound of police sirens pierced the crisp morning air at Windsor Castle. For the gathered crowd, tourists, veterans, parents, and children, time seemed to slow. The biker, moments ago roaring with hateful triumph, now lay pinned beneath the polished boot of a man who had quietly, efficiently demonstrated the meaning of real strength. His leather vest, once proudly displaying offensive symbols, was now scuffed and torn, his muscles exhausted from futile struggles against the guard's disciplined grip. Two British police officers hurried into the scene, their faces tight with focus. They approached swiftly, their eyes flicking between the biker's sprawled body, the uniformed guard standing firm, and the stunned crowd. "Assault on a Queen's Guard," one officer murmured, his voice both professional and disapproving. With perfect coordination, Alexander smoothly shifted his weight, allowing the officers to handcuff the biker. The heavy metal clicks echoed in the silent courtyard. The biker tried to bluster, spitting out half-formed threats. "You'll regret this. My brothers will come for me." But even he knew his words were empty. Alexander remained calm, his stance unwavering. His white gloves, still pristine, despite the scuffle, rested lightly on his ceremonial rifle. The elderly veteran, who had watched everything, approached with a respectful nod. "Royal Marines, 1980 to 95, he introduced himself quietly. "Good to see the standards haven't slipped." Alexander didn't need to reply. The shared glance between the two men spoke volumes. They understood something that the younger onlookers were only now beginning to grasp, that the uniform isn't just for show, and that the quiet dignity of service holds a power far greater than noise or bluster. Parents bent down to explain to their children what they had just witnessed. Tourists whispered among themselves, a mix of respect and amazement in their voices. A young woman wiped a tear from her cheek, moved by the realization that true strength isn't in shouting or pushing, but in standing firm for what's right. As the police led the biker away, his boots dragging against the ancient stones, his so-called symbols of power appeared pitiful under the glare of the morning sun. And as Alexander resumed his post, his uniform immaculate, his posture proud, the crowd understood they had witnessed something rare, a living symbol of honor, discipline, and unshakable service. After the police escorted the biker away, the courtyard at Windsor Castle slowly returned to its usual rhythm. But something had changed. The crowd that remained was quieter, more thoughtful, and filled with a profound sense of respect. Guard Alexander Shaw stood once again at his post, his red ceremonial uniform as pristine as before the encounter, his bearskin hat casting a long shadow in the mid-morning sun. To the unknowing tourist arriving just then, it might have seemed like nothing had happened, but for those who had witnessed the confrontation, the air still carried the weight of what they had seen, a living reminder of what true strength and dignity look like. An elderly couple stood arm in arm, their eyes moist with emotion. "We thought we were just here for sightseeing." The woman murmured to her husband, "But we've been given a memory we'll never forget." Nearby, parents knelt to quietly explain to their children why the man in the red uniform didn't fight back until it truly mattered, how discipline sometimes means waiting for the right moment, not reacting to every insult or shove. Young tourists who might once have laughed at the stiff, silent guards now looked at Alexander with new understanding. They had seen the difference between empty provocation and the calm power of someone who knows his duty and his strength. The old veteran who had saluted Alexander earlier stood nearby, his chest adorned with faded medals. He spoke softly to another onlooker. "That's the thing about real soldiers. They don't need to shout, threaten, or swagger. They let their actions speak. And today that young man spoke louder than any words." And so, the day moved on at Windsor Castle. But for many, it carried a quiet echo. The knowledge that some uniforms stand not for decoration, but for honor hard-earned and never surrendered. In the days following the incident at Windsor Castle, the story of Guard Alexander Shaw spread beyond the castle walls. Newspapers, television, and social media all recounted the dramatic encounter between the heavily tattooed biker and the disciplined Queen's Guard. Yet, beyond the headlines and viral videos, there was a deeper lesson that resonated, one that older generations recognized immediately. For many seniors, the story echoed familiar values: discipline, patience, and the quiet strength of duty. Alexander's actions reminded people that true power doesn't come from loud threats or aggressive displays, but from steadfast resolve and an unwavering commitment to principles. It was a reminder that the traditions we pass down, whether through military service, family, or community, hold enduring meaning even in a modern, fast-moving world. Veterans who had served in past conflicts saw in Alexander the reflection of their own service, their own moments of being tested. Families sat together and talked about the difference between bravado and real courage. For older viewers, the event wasn't just about a guard standing his ground. It was about witnessing the triumph of values that they had long cherished, the kind of quiet dignity that carries a weight far greater than any show of force